Smart women don't choose the wrong men because they're stupid or silly or even worthless. Smart women choose the wrong men because it feels familiar. And what feels familiar often comes from what's hurt you. That's it. That's the blueprint you've developed. That's the pattern that you have followed to the T. And here we break that. Welcome to the other side. Welcome to the other side, where you become the woman who can no longer be chosen by the wrong man. My name is Carrie Hudson. I'm a therapist and a guide helping women to break toxic relationship patterns and develop the blueprint for healthy, lasting love. And today we are going to answer the question, why do smart women choose the wrong men? And the bottom line is that these two dynamics have nothing to do with one another and also everything to do with one another, quite frankly, because being smart is logic, right? You can take some ideas and concepts and put them together to produce an outcome. You know that 1 + 1 = 2. You know, how to solve a problem. That is smart, right? It requires lots of logical, conscious thinking. Whereas choosing a mate typically is very emotional and very unconscious. It's driven by past experiences. There's not a lot of conscious thought or active thinking involved in the process of choosing a mate. There's lots of overthinking that typically comes from it, especially when you're anxious, but not a lot of active, proactive thinking about, what might happen or who this person is. There's not a lot of logic in it. And so the key is to actually wake up the unconscious decisions, right? And bring attention to them and pull them out of hiding and in the dark so that you can make conscious decisions about your love life, right? Because for some of us, it can actually work that we can subconsciously and unconsciously choose a mate. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But for many of us, it cannot work like that, okay? And so to start off, I want to read you a passage from this book, Wired for Love by Stan Tatkin. It's not a book that I necessarily recommend that you read, but it is a book for couples who are already in relationship. And there's one part of this book that really stuck out to me from the foreword written by Harville Hendrick. And he pretty much talks about this shift from from conscious love to unconscious love. And that shift came from arranged marriages to marriages where, people are able to just choose for themselves. And what he's describing here is how, arranged marriages were very conscious, right? These are parents making a logical decision for their children. They're looking at the family values on the other side. They're looking at how this kid was raised and could this be a good partnership for our kid, because they understood that marriage was a lot more than just love and romance. It's, work, it's partnership, right? And so the shift comes with an increase in divorce rates where people are no longer being arranged in marriage, but they are now choosing marriage for love. And the role of the unconscious, right? These patterns, this blueprint that's looming in the background that's driving these decisions. And he says, it was little guessed that our unconscious minds are deeply involved in our personal choices, and our past interpersonal experiences have a powerful impact on our present adult relationships. The discovery led to the awareness that our choice of a partner, if it is romantic, is influenced by our unconscious minds more than our rational preferences. The partner that we unconsciously choose is dauntingly similar to the caretakers who reared us. Thus, the needs we want met in our adult intimate relationships are presented to persons who are woefully similar to the persons who did not meet those needs when we were children. So, what he's explaining here is, if you grew up in a home where your emotional needs were not met, then you are going to grow up to choose partners who do not meet your emotional needs, meaning the wrong men, right? Men who are emotionally unavailable, toxic, maybe even abusive, right? Because you have taken this blueprint from your childhood and expected that whoever you are going to live your life with must fall into this blueprint, okay? And the blueprint is that my emotional needs don't need to be met. And sometimes that's hard to really grasp, because if you are a smart woman, if you are a high achieving woman, then you probably came from a family where, you had maybe a mother and a father, or you grew up with a single parent who was accomplished and did, worked hard and did some things right, but there were some family values there. And, you probably didn't grow up thinking like, oh, I wasn't loved or my emotional needs weren't met. You actually have not been aware of your emotional needs, if we're being honest, because you never could be aware of those emotional needs. And that, again, is part and parcel of this pattern and this blueprint that you've developed for your relationships, where my emotional needs have never been met. So I don't need them to be met today, now, or ever, or I'll meet my emotional needs. And typically that doesn't even happen. So if you grew up in a home, right, there's some of us who have grown up in homes where there was lots of abuse, right? And that leads to more abuse typically. But many of us may have grown up in homes where it wasn't necessarily abusive, although there were some abusive moments where there was more control than needed to be. Um, Even we talk about spankings, which was very culturally appropriate at a point in time, which is actually abuse, right? And the more subtle issue is emotional neglect. And many of us had our needs met, right? We lived in homes, we had food, clothes, and shelter. Parents gave us everything that we needed, maybe a lot of or all of what we wanted. And so we felt like, oh, our parents love us. My parents took care of me. But that's not everything. Even if you had parents who were together and maybe modeled what love is, what sort of trumps that is how they interacted directly with you. If you felt tended to, cared for, if you received affection, right? If you could talk about your emotions, talk about your day, right? Or were you silenced and ignored? And I know a big message for those of you who may come from my generation was children are to be seen and not heard, right? Which is a huge message and leaves a lasting impression on the psyche in terms of what am I here for? I can't talk about my needs. I have no needs, right? Even though you do. And that pattern develops and replicates itself in your adult relationships. And so it's important to understand that this has nothing to do with being smart, and actually everything to do with being smart, because a lot of us really leaned into education and being smart and we used a lot of logic to get here, right? Because if I don't get much attention at home, but I can get attention by bringing home good grades or by excelling in a sport or by somehow tending to my parents' needs, making sure my parents were okay, overperforming, right? Then I can be loved and I can get attention. And a lot of times I hear a lot of high achieving women really pull these two concepts together of how high achieving I am and how I have these degrees and how I got money, this, that, and the other. But these emotional needs, I can't find a good man, and men are this and men are that. And that's because you are holding up these achievements, thinking that it means that you should have a good man, when these achievements and your emotional expectations or the blueprint that you develop for yourself are both created by emotional lack. And I'm not saying that it's not good to be high achieving. I am high achieving. And there are some benefits that come, right, from emotional traumas, right, which is what I would label this as, that we can use, that are beneficial, that help us to succeed and thrive and achieve in our lives today. And they can also get in the way of what we actually want. And so it's important to really wake up this unconscious part of us who thinks that our achievements, right, and that these surface outward things are what gets us love, right? So, often when we find ourselves stuck into these patterns, then we go out and achieve more, or we go out and fix ourselves on the outside very superficially. Even our achievements on some level are superficial, right? But we don't dig into the emotional parts of us that are abandoning ourselves, right? Because when you continue to choose the wrong man, it is a choice of self abandonment subconsciously. Okay. And all of this comes from anxiety, right? It's part of this growth and development from childhood where I don't get my needs met or I don't get attention all the time. And when I say my needs met, I'm speaking specifically of emotional needs. I don't get attention all the time. But if I do something, if I perform, then I can get just enough. I can get a little drop of attention from my parents, right? And that creates this cycle where now I don't necessarily expect that someone is going to meet my emotional needs. I have to do something for it. And that sort of creates all sorts of dynamics, including codependence. Um, and it is part of the anxious attachment style, that I don't believe I'm worthy of being met emotionally unless I'm doing something to earn it, right? And so I really want to encourage you, if you're a high achieving woman and you're stuck in this pattern, to sort of set aside your achievements and lean more into your worth, right? And there's lots of work to do in that area in order to achieve that and to get there. Um, but your achievements are great, and I don't want to dismiss those or discount them. However, when we're talking about love and relationships, you can be a high achieving jerk. You can be high achieving and insensitive, or whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying that that's you, but high achieving doesn't necessarily mean anything when we're talking about connecting with people on a real personal level. Okay. And more importantly, when we're talking about you seeing yourself with someone who is worthy of you. Okay. Because a lot of times smart women are choosing men who are beneath them. And I hate to say it that way, and I might get dragged for it, but listen, it is what it is. Because if you are a smart woman and you are choosing, someone who is unmotivated, someone who you have to help, who you have to pour into, who has to be a project in order to meet you where you are, then you honestly have some challenges with your own self-worth that you need to work through, right? Because you are choosing someone that you have to pull up instead of choosing someone who's on your level, right? And again, another high achieving man doesn't necessarily mean that he's on your level, right? This is about emotional availability, emotional intelligence, someone who can match your true worth, right? And there's a lot of layers to that. So we won't go down that rabbit hole. But the reality is that smart women choose the wrong men because ultimately of the way that they see themselves, right? And the key here is to lean into understanding what's familiar about this and using logic to now circumvent and trump the familiarity of it. Because if you've been in this relationship dynamic before, then you know, oh, this feels familiar. I already know how this is going to end. Let me walk away from this. Right. And that's when logic begins to supersede emotion. But it requires you to wake up, it requires you to do the work to get there. And so the pattern is not easily broken. It takes time, it takes consistency and consistent work in a particular area, in this particular area. But you can get there. The pattern can be broken. And in order to do that, I want to be able to support you to do that. I want to invite you to our upcoming Unhooked workshop. They only happen once a quarter, 4 times a year. It is a complimentary 1 hour workshop that's happening at the end of April on April 22nd at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This is a virtual workshop, so you can join me from wherever you are in the world. And this quarter, we're talking about why you're still thinking about him when he did the bare minimum. And we're going to dig into how this came to feel so personal because you've been rereading text messages and replaying scenarios in your head, questioning yourself, trying to figure out what this all means when this isn't about him at all. This is about the hooks that have been placed in you long before he came along that has given him this sort of leverage over you. So, in this workshop, I want you to walk away with how you got to this level of attachment, why it's so hard to walk away, and how you can stop chasing this so you can start choosing yourself. I want to see you there. The link is in the description. And also subscribe. This is the first video, and I want you to be a part of this, your own evolution to becoming the woman who can no longer be chosen by the wrong man. So thank you for staying tuned and connecting with me, and I'll see you next time.